Film and Whiskey Nation, do you ever think about awards? Of course you do. You drink whiskey and watch movies, which means that you know that nothing is validated until a group of random people say, hey, we love what you're doing. The awesome thing about Doc Swinson's whiskey is that it isn't just some group of schlubs that are giving them awards. They have been winning attention from some of the most important whiskey experts that you can imagine. They've been voted best distillery in Washington State by the New York International Spirits Competition. They've been voted the best independent bottler by the Ascot Awards, as well as the best finished bourbon from the Ascot Awards for their La Menta Exploratory Cask. Their Exploratory Cask series is where they release some of the most fascinating and adventurous experiments. If you're ever checking out Doc's lineup and see a white label, there's a really good chance that that's the only time you'll see that bottle, so make sure you snatch it up. Doc Swinson's has been offering just phenomenal finished and blended whiskeys for quite some time now. You can find them online at docswhiskey.com. That's DOCS whiskey.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Film and Whiskey Podcast. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we are coming at you today with another special bonus episode.
Bonus episode.
Wow. That was quite the build-up there, Brad.
Hey, you're welcome.
How are you doing, man? I have not talked to you in like a week. When we're not recording the podcast, we just cut each other off completely, it seems like.
Well, honestly, I feel like you text me pretty often. And so sometimes I'll go like 2 or 3 days without hearing from you. And I'm like, is the podcast over? Like, Did Bob die? I don't know what's going on.
Well, I'm not on death's door, but I have been under the weather the past few days, as you can probably tell from the half octave lower that my voice currently is.
Dude, being sick is the best for podcasting.
For podcasting, for sure. For, general health and well-being, not so much.
Yeah, not at all.
But I'll tell you what's really helping me right now in my time of need is some cask strength whiskey, because we have a bottle sitting next to us here from Old Line Spirits. And Brad, we have been working to get them on the show for about a year now. I am so excited to have them on for Veterans Day. Veterans Day is tomorrow, Friday. This is a veteran-owned company. We're going to be talking with the owner, Mark McLaughlin, here in just a moment. But I got to say, even before we bring Mark into things, we get this bottle of whiskey in the mail. It is an American single malt from Maryland that is cask strength. Now, I'm not used to getting single malt from Maryland, and I'm certainly not used to it being cask strength, and I'm certainly not used to it having quite this much color to it. So I pour it out, and I'm like, all right, let's see what we got here. And it's freaking phenomenal, Brad. Like,
Bob, this is an absolutely killer whiskey. I got it in the mail a few weeks back and had a buddy over, and I was like, well, hey, let's just crack the bottle, man, see what it's like. And we were exact same experience. We were thrown off a little bit by the where it's from, the fact that it's an American single malt cask strength. Like, what's going on here? And then we drank it, and Bob, this, if we were reviewing this as a regular part of our season, it might hit like the 43 to 44 mark.
Yeah,
like,
this is
a top-notch whiskey.
It's very bourbon-y in a lot of ways. Like, it has that rich, dark, oaky character to it that you don't get on Scotch very often. And it almost reminds me, like, there's certain bourbons that call themselves like a cigar blend. It has that sort of like dark, smoky cigar thing going on to it. I'm vamping at this point because Mark is sitting over here waiting for us to call on him as we just, extol the virtues of this whiskey. Mark McLaughlin, welcome into the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for this whiskey.
Gentlemen, thank you so much, and I'm glad you received it. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
So, Mark, tell us a little bit about the company itself, because I've been reading through the history on your website, and it seems like you guys have spanned and trekked across the whole continent as you set this thing up. I'm seeing things about Washington. I'm seeing things about Ohio. I'm seeing things about Maryland. So give us the minute-long version of the history of this company.
By all means, yeah, it's an unusual start. So, Arch, my business partner, Arch Watkins, Arch and I, were friends from the Navy. We used to fly together. We were both weapons systems operators, navigators on naval aviation jets, carrier based. That's how we met and became buddies. And then, left the Navy, pursued civilian careers. Neither one of us was really that enthused with what we were doing on the civilian side. So we decided, hey, why not make whiskey? And we thought, we'll make whiskey, we'll make bourbon, we'll make rye, we'll start something from scratch. we'll jump into this the way so many others have in the past 10 years. And we stumbled across an opportunity to actually apprentice and learn how to make whiskey from two gentlemen on the West Coast near Seattle, named Bob Stilnovich and Jim Caudill. And they had a very, very, very small distillery called Golden Distillery. And they were making this just killer American single malt whiskey. And they were looking to pass the torch because Jim, unfortunately, was terminally ill. And what had started off as two guys in their retirement years, making whiskey, make a little money, but really for fun, became this chore. So they were looking to pass it on but they didn't want it to go away, right? They wanted this thing to continue. We're vets, they're vets. We liked them, they liked us. Ultimately, we moved out there, lived in the guest house, learned how to make the whiskey, bought the thing, and then, relocated it back to Baltimore. And then, in the interim, we were getting set up in Baltimore. We started producing whiskey with Middle West Spirits in Columbus, Ohio.
Let's
go.
Guys,
they're awesome. Yeah. And those guys allowed us to be extremely, and they still do allow us to be extremely hands-on. It's our grain, our yeast, our process. So it's almost like gypsy distilling in the sense that they let us go out there and be very, very involved, and they've been enormously beneficial to us, and we still work with them to this day. So that's the shortest answer I can give you. It's been a long journey, but and it's kind of a long, strange trip, if you will. But we couldn't be happier with where it brought us.
Well, I got to say, first of all, the fact that this bottle says distilled in Ohio on it just makes my heart warm. But in addition to that, I want to go in a little bit on what you guys are up to now, because it's not just this cask strength single malt that you guys are producing. You're making rums as well, and you have some variations within this world of single malt. So what are some of your other offerings besides just this bottle that we have today?
So what you have, the cask strength, is one of our two flagship offerings. That's kind of sister offering is the 86 proof expression of that same product. So those were kind of the two flagships, if you will. And to your point, we do other things. We do import rum from the Dominican Republic. It's our own blend of barrel aged rum. It's wonderful. We do that in a pretty limited amount. So it's an important part of our business, but it's a very, very small, limited part. Really, what we focus on is the single malt world. And in addition to what you have there, we've actually just started to release just a little bit of peated malt. So just like the whiskey you're drinking right now, which is, I heard you mention, that oak forward character is really drawing you in. And we love that. We love that American style oak forward aging. And we do that with our peated as well, which does differentiate it very much from a typical, Islay Scotch, for example. We do a number of barrel finishes. The most notable ones would say be Oloroso, Sherry, Madeira, and Tawny Port. And we do other ones too, but those are the ones that have really kind of started to take off. And really just, and then we've done vatted malts, we've done a bottled and bond offering that we did here in Baltimore. So yeah, lots of cool stuff that's coming out. One thing we're not doing is bourbon and rye, and we absolutely love bourbon and rye. Just absolutely, my cabinet's always full of a wide range of bourbons, rye, and scotches. But we're not doing that because this is the path we've chosen, and we're just, we want to be malt guys. That's, as far as what we make. So that's just, we're focused largely on that.
Well, and what is it about malt specifically that drew you in? Obviously it's a little bit of a smaller market here in the U.S., especially for American single malts. So what was it that made you guys, what we want to do? We're going to make American single malts.
So it's funny, I the first thing that drew us in was just the opportunity, because, when I quit I was an investment banker for about 2 years in between the Navy and this. And the way we met Bob and Jim, the guys that we ended up, apprenticing under and buying their business, was at a distilling conference that was in Seattle. I was, trying to start a distillery. I flew out there for the conference. I met Bob, one of the owners of that business, and he had come down from about 90 minutes north where he lived. And he had come down because, he knew he had decided to sell the business, and he knew that he'd find a lot of people like me who were newcomers who may be interested in the opportunity. So when I met Bob and he said he was making American single malt, I had never heard of an American single malt in my life. This is 2014. It was completely new to me. So at first, to be honest, I was a little bit taken aback. Like, oh man, I kind of had my heart set on bourbon and rye. And then, Bob said, hey, why don't you fly out a couple weeks from now, come visit the place, just see what you think. And I came out, and prior to that, he had shipped me some whiskey, illegally, but whatever. And like you did, you pop that bottle open. It's like, holy smokes. Like there's something here. And where I've kind of what I love about it, for me at least, is I love that, especially the profile that we're doing at Old Line. We're doing very much embracing the the new world aging, the number 4 char virgin oak. It's definitively a malt, right? It's not a bourbon, but it's definitively an American malt. And other American distilleries are approaching a little bit more from an old world perspective. And there's some people doing amazing, great examples like Virginia Distilling Company. They're making great whiskeys, but they're just doing it in a very different approach than we are, which is beautiful. So my point, I guess, is that what I love about what we do at Old Line is that I think it delivers all the things that a bourbon drinker wants in a very, very, very different vehicle. So it's, it's just like, hey, all, the spicy notes, the baking spices, the caramel, the vanilla, it's wonderful nutty character, things like that. Those things are there. They're just delivered almost like, when you look at the DJ booth, different levers are high or low, the mixing table, whatever you call it, it's like the same things just delivered in a very, very different way. And that's really fun to me.
I think it's a great way to put it. And I'm glad that you're not offended by me saying that it was a very bourbon-y malt earlier. And I guess for the nerds in the audience, can you go in a little bit more on like the aging process? And it sounds like you guys are using new charred oak barrels, not used ones like they would in Scotland. And with that number 4 char, is that all correct?
That is all correct. Yes, exactly. So, up until the whiskey goes into the barrel, the process, you could say, is not unlike like a Highland single malt. So we use, all non-peated malt, with the exception of, we have that one peated offering that's very limited, but 99% of what we do is all non-peated malt. But generally speaking, we're the distillate coming off the still would resemble in many ways, some Highland single malt scotches. But then that aging process, to your point, we're doing everything in mostly number 4 char, some number 3 char, but virgin oak. And you hit the nail on the head as far as calling it kind of a bourbon-y single malt. Our target consumer, frankly, as far as early adopter, is more a bourbon drinker than a Scotch drinker. And that's not to say that Scotch drinkers don't love it. It's just that I think that what we deliver draws in a lot of bourbon drinkers who didn't think that they liked malt whiskey. And what we found is that they probably just haven't been exposed to the right malts. Because as you guys know, you guys are Scotch guys, like, there's a whole wide range of single malt Scotches. And, to say, I don't like Scotch based on 1 or 2 experiences is really limiting, because there's, the difference between, a really smoky, peaty, earthy Islay and, a really fruity, kind of lighter Glenmoe. Like it couldn't be farther apart, right? And there's just a world in between. So at any rate, the reference to being a bourbon drinker's malt is something that we embrace.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we constantly talk about, is that in the same way that there's a vast amount of difference between any amount of the bourbon products that we drink, people need to get into Scotch, man. There is so many beautiful whiskeys from around the world that people aren't trying. I mean, heck, Bob and I had the Penderyn at the start of last season, I believe, which is a Welsh single malt that is incredible. They're putting out such good stuff.
It's agreed. Penderyn's a great example. And another example, do you guys know Milk and Honey out of Israel?
I've heard of it, but we haven't tried it on the show before.
Check them out. And I'll be, we'll connect offline and I'll introduce you to somebody who may be able to, guide you along there.
Awesome.
They're doing things that are, 3 years old that to me, taste like they've been aging a lot longer than that. They're just really well-made malts, and they're exciting and different. I mean, is everyone my cup of tea? No, but that's cool. They're exploring different ways. But man, when they hit, they hit. And I think that, to your point, there's just a lot of great world whiskeys. And then within Scotland, I think Scotland does get overlooked sometimes by a lot of American consumers because, again, they have 1 or 2 experiences with something that wasn't really for them. But I think that's just kind of very a limiting view, because there is such a wide range of what's available there.
Well, I feel like, to your point, though, there's something about malt as a grain, and obviously I'm not a distiller, so I'm asking you, though, like, we've heard it time and time again from people who distill malt whiskeys that it seems like there's more of a playground there, that you can go more directions with it, that, or I guess that there's a variety of ways that it can come out in the end, whether or not you intend that. But like, with corn, you have to, with bourbons, you have to add like a rye spice or wheat, like something to round it out to make it not just taste like sweet corn. And with rye, like you've got your 95.5 rye, your 100% rye, and then basically just like your 51% rye. But there's something about malt that it seems like you can go a ton of different directions with it and really play with the flavor profile, just depending on, what kind of process you use for malting it and things like that.
100%. I couldn't say it better myself. So for those of you listening who maybe aren't as familiar with what malted barley really means, but to Bob's point, malted barley, it's this grain barley that, gets harvested before it germinates. And I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, but if you imagine if that grain was left to just, fall off the plant in the fields and, it's got a really thick protein husk and a really dry, kind of starchy interior, low moisture content and starchy, but not sugary. And what that's designed to do is survive the winter. And then when the rain comes and it warms up in the spring, natural process during germination occurs where these, enzymes get released that are natural to the grain and break down those starches into sugar. And that sugar is what the plant uses to sprout. It's like the energy to sprout before it can start using photosynthesis to really start creating its own food. So all that is to say that when you malt a grain, as you guys know, but just for the listeners who may not, you're tricking that process. The malt house, the place that does this, they'll soak the grain, they'll trick it into thinking it's time to sprout, and then they'll dry it out. And the way that's done creates a dramatically different flavor within that grain. So look, one good example is we use 2 types of malted barley, which can be confusing to some people because people think single malt. Wait, shouldn't there only be one type? The single and single malt refers to being produced at one distillery. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be all malted barley, but there's different types of malted barley that we can use. So we use 2 types. And one of them is called a Copeland 2-row pale malt, premium pale malt. And if you were to take that grain before we, mill it up and mash it, it'll taste like grape nut cereal. So think mildly sweet, but a little more like starchy and grainy, it'll taste like, grain. The other one we use when they dry it out in the malting house, they dry it at a high temperature and it starts to caramelize some of those sugars that have started to form. And it gets darker. And that one we call a C120, which is C stands for crystal, but you can call it a deep kiln malt, deep roast malt. And if you were to take a bite of that grain, it tastes like Raisin Bran flakes. It's the exact same grain before they start, but the way it was processed in that malt house gives us 2 dramatically different flavors. So that, exactly to your point earlier, corn tastes like corn, right? Yeah, there's variations of different types, and I'm not trying to downplay it, but it is what it is, right? It's a pretty narrow flavor band. Yeah. Whereas malt, you can start off already, which is such a wildly different, flavor profile even before you distill it.
Well, Mark, I have to say, you are the first person, I'm 98% sure, the first person in the history of the Film and Whiskey podcast to use the word photosynthesis. So
nice. I got a whole dictionary here that I'm going to go through.
I think you might be then the smartest person ever to appear on the podcast.
My GPA in college would suggest otherwise, but I'll take the compliment.
Well, I thank you for the lesson on the grains, because I think that there's so much there to learn. There's so much to grow and understand of like what goes into the glass that you're drinking. And it honestly kind of made me think about, I was thinking about how you, being a Navy pilot, obviously a lot went into the making of Top Gun Maverick. They literally blasted it everywhere. Like, you couldn't go online in the month or 2 leading up to that movie without seeing, like, watch the documentary of the real Navy pilots who made Top Gun Maverick.
This is Brad's way. I was going to say, this is Brad's way of asking you, what do you think of Top Gun Maverick?
Yeah.
So, I hate to say it, gentlemen. I have not seen it yet.
Oh,
which I know is, it's it's crazy. I need to. And then, at first I was like, I'll wait till the theaters aren't too crowded. I'm not in no rush. And then it just kind of like life overtook it. And then I told my wife, I'm like, oh, we'll go see it together. And like, that was stupid because we never do things together because we have 3 kids and 2 businesses. So now I'm in this kind of, I guess I'm waiting for it to be available and just rent it at home. But I'm excited to see it. And it will be fun to see it. I've seen the first one. Obviously, the first one from the 80s was one of the first things that got me interested in naval aviation, like so many other people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, it's a documented thing. And I know that, like, the Navy was involved in the making of that movie. Like, the military is always involved in the making of movies like that. But recruitment spiked like crazy after that movie came out because everybody wanted to go to Top Gun. Everybody wanted to be the next Maverick. So, I mean, like, you coming on the tail end of that and that inspiring you to go into the Navy in some ways, Like when you look back on the first Top Gun, like how does it hold up to you from an actual like piloting standpoint?
Well, there's a couple of ways to answer that. I'd say that, I'll start first, like culturally. What they did what every kind of movie does, right? They'll take something like you watch a cop movie, like, okay, yeah, there's some cop behaviors and things, but it's probably pretty exaggerated, right? Like, and same thing with this, like, yeah, we're a competitive bunch, and there's a lot of that is real, but really there's actually way more collaboration than competition in naval aviation. So like, yeah, you're competing, everybody wants to be, the best at what they do, but no one's out there trying to like knock the other guy down. You know what I mean? So like they kind of amped that up a bit. But that's a movie and I get it. The flying, I'd say that, it's just when I watched as a kid, I was enthralled. And then, after going through, Navy flight school and, flying for a while, like you watch it again, you're like, wow, like what's actually happening in that scene? It couldn't be farther from what they're saying is happening. Like, there's no way this guy could be trying to shoot him with guns. He's about 4 feet away. That's not going to go well for anybody, on either party. So, but it's fun. I still watch it and enjoy it. And, my favorite part of that movie, hands down, is the first, the intro, the first like 2-3 minutes in the flight deck.
Oh yeah.
You could put that on loop and I wouldn't get sick of it.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that they recreate that as the opening to the new Top Gun too. So you're going to get like, the
nice.
4K version of that when you watch the new one.
I can't wait. The flight deck, flying in the carrier, and the nighttime stuff wasn't always the most pleasant, but the daytime, I'd do that for free. I loved it.
Is there a movie when you think about like all of the fighter pilot movies out there, is there one that sticks out to you as being the most egregiously wrong of all of them?
Oh boy. This one I've only seen once or twice, maybe and this has probably been 3 decades since I've seen it. But the one that was Iron Eagle was pretty hard to watch.
Oh, I don't know if I know that one.
You're better off. I tell you the one that I think I'm going to answer a different question. I hope you don't mind. Is that the one that I think was the biggest missed opportunity was The Flight of the Intruder, because the story, if you guys aren't familiar, it's Danny Glover was in it, and it's in the late 80s, early 90s. It was Vietnam. Actually, A6 Intruders, which was my plane that I flew was a variant of that.
Oh, okay.
And big ugly round nose jet, and it's just it was a great story. The book was really good, and then they just kind of tried to do it. They made it a little too cheesy, and it just became like such a wonderful story that they just completely dorked up, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't know. It's and I love the old ones. I love the old, Battle of Midway and those things. I can't get enough of those old World War II movies.
I remember there was a movie that Clint Eastwood did in the early 80s called Firefox. Did you ever see that movie?
That's when he goes to Russia and
yes,
steals a jet that reads your thoughts. Right?
I don't remember a damn thing about that movie except for the fact that I have never seen faker green screen in my whole life. And, at that point, Eastwood's 58 years old. So just getting him in the cockpit, he looks really uncomfortable. And then everything behind him is just so fake. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is I need you to give me a 1 to 10 on the plausibility scale of the scene in Independence Day where Will Smith is chasing the alien through the Grand Canyon in his fighter jet.
It's been a while since I've seen that. I will say that just by the way you kind of described it, I'm guessing plausibility is kind of low from what my memory is. But
come on.
But I will say, I tell you, there's a flying. I will say this, that a lot of us, have, and I'm sure they still do. I know they still do train for low level flying. So we'll fly through things like canyons. Like Washington State has some great routes that you're flying basically below the canyon walls. So that is. I'm guessing they probably exaggerated how tight the plane could turn without pulling the wings off. But flying down low in canyons and things like that. Now it's certainly more of a tactic for low altitude ingress into a target, try to below radar kind of thing. But flying low and maneuvering low is very common, and once you do it often with more than one airplane, so you'll do 2 or 4 airplanes together that are maneuvering down low. It's pretty fun. Well,
especially when the fate of mankind is at stake.
Well, that's how I go about my entire day. I assume that that's kind of the way it is. Just got to always be prepared.
All right, before we let you out of here, I need your opinion on one more movie, and I'm going to use you to settle a debate here.
Oh boy.
So we're in the middle of a mini series of Rob Reiner movies. And, we kind of try to line things up a little bit with national holidays. So it just kind of worked out that on Halloween, we had Misery, his movie Misery with James Caan and Kathy Bates. Yep. And so it was like, oh, that's kind of spooky. We'll do that for Halloween. And then we had The Princess Bride and A Few Good Men. And I said, well, let's line up A Few Good Men with the week of Veterans Day, because it's just, it's a story about the Navy. And Brad gave me so much on the episode about A Few Good Men, because he's like, this is clearly a movie where the writer, Aaron Sorkin, is just trying to like on the authority of the U.S. military. And I said, I have a completely different take on this. I feel like this is an inspiring story of Tom Cruise learning what it means to become an officer in the United States military and like embracing the integrity that an officer should truly have. And so we went at it a little bit about like, is this a polemic against the military, or is this, standing up for what the military should really be? And darn it, if A Few Good Men isn't a movie that I can watch 100 times in a row. And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, because I don't know how long it's been since you've seen it. But when you think back on that movie, like, what's your read on that film?
I've never thought of it in those terms, but my read would be, I think I would probably agree. Sorry, Brad. I think I'd probably agree more with you, Bob. And then I think that ultimately it was, highlighting probably more of the good than the bad of the military. I think there obviously is that element of how, this kind of systemic, problem in the movie where, people were, this kid was abused and murdered and it was covered up and blah, blah, blah. But I think that, I think overall, I think that they were trying to show, the positives of to your point, him, learning as this kind of young attorney, he's a Harvard grad, right? And wasn't taking his time in the Navy very seriously and skating his way through because his dad had done the same thing. And, the kind of learning point of, yes, this is a very serious business and people, and a lot's at stake. And I think that his realization of kind of the kind of gravity of what goes with his position was I think a good part of the movie. So I don't know if I answered that really, but I'd say that I think I lean more towards your view, Bob. But I think it also does point out, hey, nothing's perfect and the military is not perfect. And there's certain cultural things that, aren't healthy, just like any organization. And those exist in the military, just like anywhere else. And that's part of the movie too.
Well, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, Mark, but I don't know if you're really a reliable source on the military. So, we're just going to throw that opinion out.
This is going to become it's a real character assassination.
Oh man, Mark, we're so thankful that you've joined us today. I am curious. I was reading about some of the philanthropic things that you guys do as a veteran-owned company. Can you quickly hit on some of those things and highlight anything that's coming up for you guys that you want to promote?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. So a couple of things to your point, we do, as a company, we try to support a lot of philanthropic causes, and the ones that are nearest and dearest to us, tend to resonate with, or tend to revolve around, military service members and things like that. The biggest one we do is we work with an organization called Fisher House Foundation, which think of it like Ronald McDonald House for veterans. So when, ill or wounded service members are being treated at, VA hospitals or at base hospitals, the Fisher House, the family can stay there for free for the duration of the treatment. So right now we're doing in the markets that we're in, which is Maryland, DC, Delaware, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Colorado, accounts that take in, a 6-case stack of Old Line. We have this whole case sleeve we give them. And we promote that $5 from every bottle will be donated by Old Line to Fisher House. So we love it. It's the second year doing it. We love it. They're just a great organization. We also work with the Tailhook Education Foundation, which helps provide college scholarships to kids of fallen naval aviation and Marine Corps aviation, whether they were pilots, navigators, or maintenance personnel. So those are the two that we work with the closest. And we feel really good about that. So thank you for bringing that up. And then as far as what's coming out, for those of you who are in those markets I just mentioned, keep an eye out for our Oloroso Sherry finish. That just won Best American Single Malt Whiskey from Fred Minnick's Ascot Awards a couple months ago. And that'll be on the shelves in those markets in November, and only limited amount. But if you go to our website, oldlinespirits.com, we have a store locator, and we do our best to indicate where different products are so people can hopefully find a bottle if they'd like.
Well, Mark, this has been just a fantastic conversation. It makes our job so much easier when the person that we're interviewing is as charismatic as you are. And I don't have enough positive things to say about the company, about the whiskey. So just for me and Brad, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen, so much. This is a blast. And since I have just a few seconds left, I'm gonna put you guys on the spot here. And I forget which gentleman thinks that Jaws was said that Jurassic Park was a better movie than Jaws. And I just got to say, when I heard that on your Highland Park 12 podcast, like I said, I my jaw dropped.
Come on, man. All right, so you got one dig in against Brad and one against me. So I guess
there we go. Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. Yeah. Here. All right, everybody. This has been Mark McLaughlin from Old Line Spirits. We'll be back on Monday with another regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.